So we tend to treat the human brain like a calculator, right? You just put the right data in, run the objective algorithm, and boom, get the absolute truth out.
Right. That's the standard assumption.
Yeah, but what happens when the spreadsheet says your life is structurally sound, yet your gut is just screaming at you that something is fundamentally wrong?
Oh, that's such a common tension, and society usually demands you make a choice right there.
Exactly. You either double down on the spreadsheet and become, this cold, calculating rationalist who just suppresses every human instinct,
Mm-hmm.
or you throw the calculator out the window, become a mystic, and let your shifting emotions dictate reality.
And it really is a false binary.
It really is. So today, we are going to tear down that wall between logic and emotion. We're taking a deep dive into how the human mind and the human heart actually process truth.
Yeah, and we are relying on two extensive, incredibly dense lectures by the late philosopher and theologian, Dr. Greg Bahnsen.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the overarching mission here is synthesis, isn't it?
It is. Bahnsen's work tackles the place of logic and the place of emotion in Christian thinking. But what makes this material so compelling is how universally it diagnoses the modern condition.
Yeah, it really applies to anyone listening right now.
Definitely. We are going to deconstruct the mechanics of how you argue, the architecture of how you feel, and why separating those two mechanisms fundamentally breaks how you were designed to understand the world.
I love that. So let's unpack the mechanics first, starting with the brain. If we were going to talk about logic, we really have to look at the structural anatomy of an argument.
Right, which most people misunderstand.
Totally. And for those of you listening who study this, an argument isn't just people being nasty to each other at a dinner party,
No, not at all. We are talking about the formal relationship between propositions.
where the truth of a conclusion is asserted based on the evidence of the premises, right?
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is the razor-thin distinction between a formal argument and a mere conditional statement.
Yes. That tripped me up in the source material. It is
Yeah.
a subtle but vital distinction.
It really is. A conditional statement is just hypothetical. It's, if P, then Q.
Okay, give it the example.
Well, the source material provides a highly charged example to illustrate this structurally. It says, if the fetus is a human being, then abortion is murder.
Right. And structurally speaking, that sentence is not an argument at all.
No, it is merely a claim. The operative word there is if.
Right, because there is no premise being asserted as an actual realized fact in the world.
Exactly. There is no inference being demanded of the listener. Someone with a fiercely pro-choice worldview could look at that conditional statement and agree with the structural syntax of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess they could.
Yeah, they could say, I agree with the if-then relationship. I just reject the premise that the condition has been met. They agree on the hypothetical bridge, but they aren't crossing it.
That makes so much sense. So the trigger that turns a hypothetical into an actual argument is the assertion of reality. Moving from the word if to the word because.
You are planting a flag in reality. When the sentence shifts to, because the fetus is a human being, abortion is murder, the speaker is no longer floating in the realm of hypotheticals.
They're making a concrete claim.
Right. You are asserting a premise as an absolute fact. The fetus is human, and you are claiming that the conclusion, abortion's murder, necessarily and unavoidably follows from that fact.
The truth of one proposition is bearing the entire weight of the other.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But I want to push back on the terminology a bit, or, at least how we apply it to everyday life.
Sure, go ahead.
The source makes another distinction between an argument and an explanation. It uses the example of a woman named Betty baking bread.
Ah, Betty's bread.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the statement is, because Betty forgot to add yeast, the bread did not rise. No, wait, you just said the word because is the trigger for an argument.
I did.
But Bahnsen claims this Betty statement is not an argument. That feels super contradictory to me.
I know, it feels that way until we separate physical causality from logical epistemology.
Okay, break that down for me.
When someone says, because Betty forgot the yeast, the bread did not rise, they aren't trying to prove to you that the bread is flat.
Oh, I see. Because you're both just standing in the kitchen looking at the flatbread.
Right. The reality of the conclusion is not in dispute. The word because in this scenario is functioning as a scientific or historical explanation for a physical state of affairs.
So it's describing the cause of an event rather than giving me a reason to believe a new proposition.
Exactly. Let's look at the alternative. If that sentence were truly an argument, the speaker would be saying, I am trying to logically force you to believe this bread is flat, and my absolute proof is that Betty forgot the yeast.
Which is ridiculous.
It logically fails instantly. The bread could be flat for a dozen other reasons. The oven could be broken.
She could have used the wrong flour.
Right. The absence of yeast scientifically caused the bread to stay flat in this specific historical instance, but it does not logically compel the universal conclusion that the bread must be flat.
Okay, think about the structural framework of a house,
That's a good way to look at it.
You can't just take conditional statements, the if-thens, throw them on an empty lot, and call it a building. That's just a pile of lumber.
Yeah, very clean way to visualize it.
An argument requires the premises, the walls, to literally support the conclusion, the roof.
And with the Betty's bread explanation, you are looking at a collapsed roof and pointing to a rotten wooden beam to explain why it fell.
Right. You aren't arguing that the roof fell, you are diagnosing the physical cause.
Exactly. Whereas an argument is the architectural blueprint proving the roof will hold based on the mathematical strength of the walls.
And pushing that architectural metaphor further brings us to the most dangerous magic trick the human mind plays on itself.
Oh, the conflation of truth and validity.
Yes. You can draft an architectural blueprint that is mathematically flawless. The load-bearing equations are perfect, but if you try to build that house out of wet cardboard, it collapses.
Right. Conversely, you could have a pile of indestructible titanium beams, but if you arrange them in a structurally unsound way, it also collapses.
Which is the exact difference between a valid argument and a true conclusion. The source material drives this point home, and it's genuinely unsettling how often we conflate these two things.
What's fascinating here is how we constantly grant the label of logical validity to anything that arrives at our preferred destination.
Oh, people do it all the time.
But formal logic demands we separate the vehicle from the destination.
Let's give the listener the absurd example from the source to make this really concrete. If the moon is made of green cheese, then the Earth is in desperate trouble. The moon is made of green cheese, therefore the Earth is in desperate trouble.
Looking purely at the blueprint, that's a perfectly valid argument.
Wait, really?
Yes. The form is modus ponens. If P, then QP is asserted. Therefore, Q follows. The walls support the roof perfectly. The logical structure is unassailable.
But the material itself is just complete garbage. The premises are total fictions.
Exactly. So you have a flawlessly valid argument yielding a totally false conclusion. Validity only measures the structure. Truth measures the material content.
Wow. Okay, now flip the variables. You can have an invalid, broken structure that happens to arrive at a true conclusion, right?
Yes. The source uses this one. If Shakespeare wrote Paradise Lost, then Shakespeare is a great author. Shakespeare wrote Paradise Lost, therefore Shakespeare is a great author.
Oh, man. I can already hear the defense mechanism kicking in if you challenge someone on that.
Yeah.
You tell them their argument is flawed, and they immediately deflect by defending the conclusion.
He'd say, what, you don't think Shakespeare's a great author?
Exactly, because the conclusion is factually true. Shakespeare's a great author.
But the vehicle used to arrive at that truth is a logical disaster. He didn't write Paradise Lost, John Milton did.
Right, so the premise is false, the structural inference is broken, but the final destination just happens to be accurate.
For you listening, think about how pervasive this is in your daily information diet.
Oh, it's everywhere.
You scroll through an article or sit in a corporate strategy meeting, and someone presents a logical structure that is entirely invalid, a total house of cards.
But because the final sentence aligns with your political bias or, your business strategy, you nod and say, that was a highly logical presentation.
No, it wasn't. You just agreed with the roof, so you willingly ignored the fact that there are no walls holding it up.
That is so true. So, if validity doesn't guarantee material truth, and truth can exist despite invalid logic, we have to look at the actual toolkits we use to navigate reality, right?
Right. The source categorizes human reasoning into three primary modes: formal reasoning, abductive reasoning, and material reasoning.
Okay, so formal reasoning is what we were just discussing with modus ponens. Deductive, necessary conclusions. It's essentially mathematics.
Yes. It works with absolute certainties within a closed system.
Got it. And what's abductive reasoning?
Then you have abductive reasoning, which is basically the inference to the best explanation. It's what a detective uses at a crime scene or a doctor uses when diagnosing a patient.
So you observe a set of facts and construct an organizing model that best accounts for all the data.
Exactly. It doesn't offer absolute mathematical certainty, but it offers the most rational explanatory framework.
But the arena where we spend, Like 99% of our lives is the third category, right?
Yeah.
Material reasoning.
Inductive logic.
We gather probabilities, we weigh evidence, and we make assumptions. And because this is where we live, it is also where we fall into the most egregious traps, the informal fallacies.
The dark shadow of material reasoning. The source breaks these fallacies down into 3 subcategories: relevance, ambiguity, and presumption.
And looking closely at these reveals so much about human psychology.
It really does. Take the fallacies of relevance, specifically the ad hominem attacking the person instead of the argument.
The source uses a historical political debate as the example here. Someone is arguing against Senator Ted Kennedy's policy proposals regarding an international oil embargo.
Right.
But instead of dismantling the economic viability of the embargo, the opponent says his policy can't be right because he lives an irresponsible personal life.
We gravitate toward the ad hominem because it is cognitively cheap, and it's rhetorically devastating.
It's so much easier than actual debate.
Exactly. Engaging with international oil economics requires rigorous mental labor. Attacking a person's moral character is effortless.
But logically, a person's moral failings have absolutely zero mathematical bearing on whether their empirical claims about supply chains are accurate.
Bahnsen notes this is exceptionally prevalent in theological circles, too, rejecting a complex doctrine not by engaging the ancient text, but because the pastor presenting it is unlikable.
Ouch. Yeah, that hits close to home for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Another fallacy of relevance is the appeal to the mob, right?
Yes. 15 million Americans bought this product, so it must be superior.
We operate on this evolutionary herd mentality, assuming truth is democratic. If enough people believe a premise, it magically transforms into a fact.
Which is mathematically absurd. Moving to the fallacies of ambiguity, we see how language itself betrays us. Equivocation is the classic example here.
Where a key term shifts its semantic meaning halfway through the argument.
Exactly.
The dad joke example from the source is perfect for this. Some dogs have spots. My dog has spots, therefore my dog is some dog.
It creates the illusion of logic. The word some is doing 2 completely different jobs there.
Right. In the premise, some is quantitative a portion of the biological population.
But in the conclusion, some dog is qualitative slang for an impressive animal. The structural blueprint looks intact until you realize the material is metamorphosed mid-construction.
Reification does the same thing, but it's even more insidious. We hear this constantly in economic or environmental rhetoric. Reification is treating an abstract concept as if it were a concrete entity with personal intentions.
Oh, absolutely. You can't fool Mother Nature, or the stock market is angry today.
Right. Nature is just a conceptual shorthand for infinitely complex biological and meteorological systems.
And the stock market is a generalization for millions of disconnected human transactions. Neither possesses an intellect, emotions, or intentionality.
So when you build a logical argument based on the supposed intentions of an abstract concept, you are committing a fallacy of ambiguity.
Precisely. Then we hit the fallacies of presumption. These basically dictate almost all social media discourse today.
Oh, for sure. The hasty generalization, taking one data point and pasting it over the entire set. My specific congressman took a bribe, therefore the entire legislative branch is inherently corrupt.
Or the complex question, which is designed specifically to trap the respondent.
Like the classic, have you stopped beating your wife?
It is brilliant in its malice because it presumes a prior question has already been answered affirmatively.
It forces the respondent to implicitly admit guilt regardless of a yes or no answer because the premise is smuggled into the inquiry itself.
And lastly, the false cause. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. Event A happened before event B. Therefore, event A caused event B.
The source uses the sotrical example of the New Deal for this. Someone argues that all current economic woes stem from the New Deal simply because the New Deal preceded the current era chronologically.
It's like asserting the rooster crowing causes the sun to rise. Chronological sequence is entirely distinct from causal necessity.
Okay, I have to step in here on behalf of the listener because we just ran through a gauntlet.
We did cover a lot of ground.
Ad hominem, mob appeals, equivocation, reification, hasty generalizations, complex questions, false causes. If every conversation, every news article, and every debate is rigged with these landmines, how do we avoid total analysis paralysis?
That's a fair question.
I mean, do we just walk around with a clipboard grading everyone's syllogisms?
No, if you view logic merely as an endless minefield, you will absolutely become paralyzed. To navigate the traps, you have to elevate the conversation.
Elevated.
We have to transition from the mere mechanics of logic to the philosophy and theology of logic. You have to ask why logic exists in the first place.
And this is where the source pulls the camera way back. Because logic isn't a physical law of the universe like gravity, right? You can't put a modus ponens in a test tube and weigh it.
Exactly. Logic is a second-order discipline. It is meta-argumentation.
That argument's about arguments.
Right. If a marine biologist is debating the migration patterns of whales, they are arguing about biology. But if a logician enters the room and says, the structure of your argument about whale migration is invalid, the logician isn't talking about whales.
They're talking about the invisible rules governing how human beings ought to reason.
Correct. So logic doesn't physically exist out in the vacuum of space. It is not the physical machinery of the universe.
But, and this is a big but, the very fact that logic works, the fact that we can establish universal rules about argumentation, that presupposes a highly specific kind of universe.
Yes. Think about the alternative. If the universe was just random, absurd, swirling chaos, if we were merely the accidental byproducts of a cosmos that signifies nothing, then the concept of objective logic would be a delusion.
There would be zero reason to assume that the chemical firing of synapses in our primate brains corresponds to any universal transcendent truth.
But because we can find objective truth, it implies the universe is structured to be intelligible.
Right. For the Christian worldview Dr. Bahnsen is mapping out, logic is a reflection of the mind of a consistent creator. It mirrors the relationship holding between truths in the mind of God.
We aren't just using logic to win debates. We're using it because we exist in a universe where truth is woven into the fabric of reality.
Which brings us to Bahnsen's most memorable metaphor, the buzzsaw.
Yes, this is a crucial concept.
He uses it to explain human reasoning before and after the fall of man, the theological assertion that human nature has been corrupted by sin.
So think of a buzzsaw. A buzzsaw is a tool. It's machinery. You can take a buzzsaw and cut with the grain of a piece of wood, or you can rotate it and cut against the grain.
The tool itself is entirely unchanged. The steel teeth of the blade remain exactly the same. The only variable is the intention and application of the person holding the saw.
Exactly. The laws of logic are the buzzsaw. The law of non-contradiction, the rules of valid inference, these are the teeth of the blade.
And the source argues that every human being, whether they are operating from a framework of devout religious belief or absolute secular materialism, is holding the exact same saw.
We all have access to the laws of logic. The division occurs in how we apply the blade to the wood of reality.
Cutting with the grain would mean using logic under the umbrella of a revealed worldview, right? Using it as a tool to understand your place within a created, purposeful universe.
Yes. While cutting against the grain is taking that exact same logical buzzsaw and using it as an ultimate autonomous standard to judge the universe.
It is the demand that infinite realities submit entirely to finite human comprehension.
The tool hasn't changed. The ethical application has shifted from discovery to rebellion.
This should force you, the listener, to interrogate your own mind right now. Are you operating under the assumption that your reasoning is a purely neutral, objective arbitrator?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source makes a compelling case that there is no such thing as neutral ground. You always bring a worldview to the table.
There is always an underlying bias driving the blade of your mental buzzsaw.
Assuming your logic is entirely free of metaphysical bias is one of the most profound forms of self-deception.
So we have this incredible tool. Logic reflects an intelligible universe. But even the sharpest buzzsaw has a breaking point. It can't cut through everything.
No, it can't.
What happens when the buzzsaw hits a steel beam and the teeth shatter? This leads us to the fragility of formal logic and the hard limits of human knowledge.
Despite the pedestal modern society places it on, the academic field of logic is actually deeply unsettled.
Really? How so?
If you gather the world's top logicians in a room and ask them to define what logic fundamentally is in a material sense, you will not get a consensus.
Some materialists argue that logical rules are just physical brain states, electrical impulses, and chemical reactions, which reduces logic to biology.
Others argue logic is merely a convention of human language. We culturally agreed to speak this way over millennia.
And others say logical rules are abstract, non-physical entities floating in some ethereal realm.
If the metaphysical foundation of logic is a mystery, its supreme authority is inherently shaky.
Furthermore, attempting to definitively prove the laws of logic results in the ultimate philosophical catch-22.
Right, because if you want to build a deductive argument proving the laws of logic are true, you have to use the laws of logic to make the argument.
You are begging the question. It is circular reasoning. You're using the tool to validate the tool.
And if you try to use inductive evidence like saying, well, logic has successfully kept me alive every day so far, that only proves historical probability. It doesn't prove absolute universal necessity for tomorrow.
But the fragility becomes most apparent when we take the pristine mathematical formulas of formal logic and drag them down into the messy, contextual reality of natural human language.
This is where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the bedrock law of identity. A is A. A thing is identical to itself.
It cannot be non-A at the same time and in the same relationship. Nobody can argue with that, right?
In a vacuum, no. But the source provides a grounded example of how this shatters in real conversation.
Okay, lay it on me.
Imagine you work for a corrupt boss. He tells you to doctor the quarterly inventory numbers, to cheat the shareholders, and to justify it, he looks at you and says, look, business is business, just do it.
And your conscience kicks in, so you reply, no, business isn't business, that's fraud.
You just explicitly denied that A is A. You stated that business, which is A, is not business, which is A.
Oh, wow. I see what you mean.
If your boss was a strict formal logician, he could terminate you on the spot, screaming, you illogical fool, you just violated the fundamental law of identity.
But he wouldn't do that, because intuitively he understands semantic drift. When he says business is business, the word is doing two different things.
Exactly. He means the commercial enterprise of making money is an arena where traditional morality is suspended.
And your reply, business isn't business, translates to, operating a company does not equal a license to commit crimes.
The pristine formula of A is entirely useless here until it is filtered through the contextual semantic web of human interpretation. Logic requires a human interpreter to function. It is not our autonomous, self-executing machine.
And because it relies on our finite human minds, logic has a ceiling. There are concepts that break our categories.
The source delves into this by looking at apparent contradictions in the Bible, concepts like the Trinity God being three in one simultaneously, or the tension between exhaustive divine predestination and genuine human moral responsibility.
From a purely finite mathematical standpoint, those concepts clash. The spreadsheet produces an error code.
They seem like contradictions.
Now, I want to represent the skeptic here. If we admit that human logic has a ceiling, and that certain concepts break the law of non-contradiction, aren't we just handing ourselves a blank check to believe irrational nonsense?
That's a valid concern.
Can't anyone just justify a cultish, crazy belief by waving their hands and saying, oh, it's just a mystery beyond human logic?
It is a critical pushback, and the source is highly sensitive to it. Bahnsen makes a vital distinction between something that contradicts reason and something that transcends our current category scheme because we lack exhaustive knowledge.
Okay, break down the difference between contradicting and transcending.
Imagine a two-dimensional stick figure living on a flat sheet of paper. His entire understanding of physics is limited to length and width.
Right, he has no concept of depth.
Now imagine a three-dimensional sphere passing perfectly through his 2D plane. What does the stick figure see? He sees a single dot appear out of nowhere, miraculously grow into a large circle, and then shrink back into a dot before vanishing.
In his 2D logic, an object cannot spontaneously change its mass and boundaries. It violates his laws of physics.
Exactly. To him, it is an impossible contradiction. But the sphere doesn't contradict objective reality. It transcends the 2D category scheme.
The stick figure simply lacks the dimensional framework, the depth to process the event.
So what we perceive as a logical contradiction might just be a symptom of our own lack of exhaustive knowledge. We don't have all the variables.
The Christian worldview asserts that God possesses exhaustive knowledge of all variables and relationships in the universe. Therefore, God's mind determines what is ultimately logically possible.
When a finite human encounters an apparent paradox in divine revelation, it isn't a license for irrationality. It is an acknowledgement that our category scheme is too small to encompass the infinite.
So if logic is a powerful buzzsaw, but it fundamentally has a ceiling, it breaks down against the infinite, and it fractures a natural language, we are left with a massive void.
We are.
How do we actually process truth when our intellect hits a wall? If we aren't just calculating algorithms, what else forms our understanding of reality?
This is the profound pivot of the deep dive. We have to transition to the second lecture in our source material. We are moving from the realm of the intellect to the realm of human emotion.
And this transition completely upended my perspective. The source references an essay by the theologian B.B. Warfield concerning the triangle of truth.
Yes, Warfield argued that truth is perceived and integrated through three interacting points: authority, the intellect, and the heart.
Yet, within the Reformed Christian tradition that the source material stems from, there is a prevailing cultural attitude that fiercely distrusts the heart.
It's the cliche, never follow your feelings.
The source calls this the icebox approach to theology. You are expected to dump cold water on your emotions, lock them in a freezer, and rely exclusively on rigid doctrine and deductive logic.
It's a massive overcorrection, because when you actually look at the biblical text, it treats emotions not as passive accidents, but as ethical imperatives.
Wait, really? It commands emotions.
Christianity doesn't just ask you to calculate truth, it explicitly commands emotions. It commands you to love your neighbor. It commands you to rejoice always. It commands you to fear God and to sorrow over death, but not as those who have no hope. You are given divine orders to inhabit a specific emotional state.
Historically, this infuriated secular rationalists. The source highlights the philosopher Hegel, who despised Christianity specifically for this reason.
Yes, Hegel believed Judaism was more rational because it primarily commanded behavior: do this, don't do that.
But Christianity, Hegel argued, was absurdly authoritarian because it commanded feelings. He operated on the modern secular assumption: you can't help the way you feel.
We view emotions like the weather. A storm of anger rolls in, a wave of sadness washes over us. We are passive victims of our psychological climate.
But the biblical worldview rejects that passivity. It asserts that you are responsible for your emotions. They can be trained, molded, and transformed through deep thought, habituation, and spiritual renewal.
The source illustrates the gravity of this by examining the first sin, the fall of man, in the Garden of Eden.
We typically visualize Eve eating the forbidden fruit as a sterile legal violation, a simple crossing of a boundary line.
But the text describes it as a profoundly sensory, aesthetic, and emotional experience.
She saw that the fruit was good for food, a delight to the eyes, and desirable to make one wise. It was an aesthetic adventure.
She connected the beautiful, created aesthetics of the fruit with the emotional thrill of autonomy. It was an emotional lust for an experience that promised ultimate joy.
And the immediate aftermath was the fracturing of humanity's emotional architecture.
The new emotions introduced were catastrophic: shame, fear of the voice of God, hatred and blame directed at her husband.
The fall wasn't just an intellectual error, it was an emotional collapse.
Therefore, redemption in the Christian worldview cannot merely be a change in legal status, nor is it just intellectual enlightenment. It requires the total restoration of the emotional architecture.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This reframes the entire concept of spiritual or personal growth. It isn't downloading a PDF of theological facts into your brain. It is a holistic system update.
Yes. You don't just learn that an action is morally wrong. You learn to actually hate the evil. You don't just deduce that God is good. You learn to genuinely delight in that goodness.
Your emotional response is an integral part of your truth perception.
This raises an important question. If human beings are designed to possess these sanctified, purposeful emotions as a core component of how we process reality, what does that say about the ultimate reality itself?
If we are made in God's image, does God himself feel?
This takes us down a fascinating historical and linguistic rabbit hole.
Oh, I love this part.
Because if you read the classical historical documents of this specific theological tradition, namely the Westminster Confession of Faith from the 17th century, it explicitly states that God is, quote, without passions.
And in the 20th century, philosophers like Gordon Clark read that phrase, without passions, and took it to its absolute logical extreme.
Clark argued this meant God is pure intellect, pure logic, completely and totally devoid of any emotion whatsoever.
In this view, emotion is a human weakness tied to biological hardware. So a perfect deity must be an emotionless supercomputer.
But the source material completely dismantles this cold, calculating view of God by giving us a crucial lesson in the history of the English language.
When we use the word passion in the 21st century, we mean a strong, intense emotion, a crime of passion, a passionate romance.
But in the 17th century, when that document was authored, the word passion meant something entirely different.
The root is the Latin word paetor, meaning to suffer or to be acted upon, right?
Exactly. In 17th century physics and philosophy, a passion was a passive physical property of a material body. It was an attribute of physical extension, mass, or weight.
And the definitive proof of this, which is honestly hilarious to read, is that 17th century mathematical textbooks literally refer to the passions of a triangle or the passions of a parallelogram.
Or the passions of water. Obviously, a triangle does not experience the thrill of romantic love. A parallelogram does not fall into a deep depression.
Oh, the poor acute angle is feeling so insecure today.
Precisely. When they spoke of the passions of a parallelogram, they were identifying its physical attributes, its angles, its area, its geometric nature.
Therefore, when the Westminster Confession states that God is a pure spirit, invisible, without body parts or passions, it is simply declaring a theological truth about God's immateriality.
It means God does not have the physical attributes of a material body. It has absolutely nothing to do with his internal emotional life.
It's just stating he doesn't have mass or atoms. And yet, an entire 20th century theological movement accidentally skewed its view of God, turning him into an unfeeling icebox, simply because they failed to check a historical dictionary.
It raises a vital question about how we interpret historical texts. How much of our modern worldview, whether in theology, philosophy, or constitutional law, is accidentally distorted because semantic meaning has drifted over 300 years?
Especially when the actual text of the Bible paints a vastly different picture of God. It describes a deity who is deeply, profoundly emotional.
A God who grieves over the corruption of the world, who burns with anger at injustice, who rejoices over his people, who laughs, who loves with intense ferocity.
The source references B.B. Warfield again, pointing out that the emotions of Jesus Christ in the New Testament are not human weaknesses. They are the perfect expression of the emotional life of God housed in human flesh.
So we arrive at a synthesized reality. The Creator possesses both perfect reason and perfect emotion, and humans are designed in that image to reason and to feel. But, because of the fall, our internal navigation systems are corrupted.
And that collision brings us to the absolute climax of this deep dive. What actually happens when your internal navigation system malfunctions? What do you do when your intellect and your emotions point in completely opposite directions?
It is the most practical dilemma of the human experience. When your brain says one thing and your gut says another, which faculty is the ultimate master?
The source gives an incredibly vivid, relatable example. Imagine a strict, intellectually rigid churchgoer from a very solemn, stoic tradition. One day, they decide to attend a lively, expressive Pentecostal service.
Okay, picture that.
Now, this person's intellect, their deeply ingrained theological framework, is screaming at them, "This is wrong. The liturgy is chaotic. The theology is imprecise. I need to leave."
But simultaneously, their emotions are lighting up. They feel the joy in the room, and their heart is saying, there is something real here. This is beautiful. I want to participate.
A civil war within the soul. The intellect and the emotion are in direct contradiction.
So what is the move? Do you throw a bucket of cold water on your emotions, grit your teeth, scold yourself for feeling joy, and march out the door?
Or do you abandon all your intellectual theological convictions because the music made you feel euphoric?
Historically, a vast array of philosophers have argued for the bucket of cold water. We mentioned Gordon Clark's primacy of the intellect, but this bias goes all the way back to ancient Greece. It goes back to Plato.
The charioteer metaphor.
Yeah. Yes. Plato envisioned the human soul as a chariot pulled by two horses. One is a noble, beautiful white steed, representing righteous indignation and high spirit.
And the other?
The other is a dark, unruly, bloodshot-eyed beast representing the base appetites and passions. And driving the chariot is reason, the charioteer.
So reason's primary job is to whip the dark, emotional beast into submission, forcing the soul to fly straight.
Exactly. Reason is the holy, noble master, and emotion is the ugly beast that needs constant taming.
But the source material, drawing on the work of theologian Cornelius Van Til, completely dismantles this Greek assumption.
Van Til points out that this hierarchical view of the soul denies the fundamental Christian doctrine of total depravity.
Let's define total depravity for the listener, because that phrase carries a lot of baggage.
Total depravity does not mean that human beings are as utterly evil as they could possibly be in every moment. It means that the fall humanity's corruption by sin affected the totality of the human person.
Every single faculty is tainted. Your will is tainted. Your emotions are tainted.
And crucially, your intellect and your reason are tainted.
Ah, so reason didn't somehow escape the Garden of Eden unscathed. The charioteer is just as fallen as the horses.
Your intellect is just as capable of rebellion, pride, blind spots, and error as your emotions are. Therefore, the head and the heart are ontologically equal.
Meaning, at the very core of their nature, One is not built to be morally superior to the other. There is absolutely no guarantee that your intellect is inherently more sanctified or more accurate than your emotions in any given moment.
Taking that further, it means when the churchgoer is standing in the Pentecostal service, their cold, rigid intellect might actually be the faculty that is sinning.
Wait, really? The intellect might be the problem.
Yes, the intellect might be exhibiting sectarian pride or arrogance, while their emotions are actually accurately perceiving the genuine sanctified joy of the Holy Spirit.
The emotion might be entirely right, and the spreadsheet mind might be entirely wrong.
Or vice versa. The emotion might be manipulated by the swelling chords of the music, while the intellect is correctly identifying a theological danger. The point is, there is no automatic default setting where the brain automatically wins.
To make this practical, I want to use an analogy based on how the source describes this interaction. Think about the physical act of reading a novel.
That's a great example.
You don't read a chapter, map out a formal deductive syllogism, and then rationally deduce whether you enjoyed the prose.
The experience doesn't work that way at all.
You read a page, and you get an immediate visceral gut feeling. This character feels authentic, or this dialogue is clunky. The feeling registers first.
And then your intellect engages. You go back, you analyze the text, you look at the author's syntax, and you try to intellectually articulate why your gut reacted that way.
And sometimes, upon rigorous intellectual analysis, you realize your gut reaction was flawed. You misread the author's tone or missed the irony, so your intellect corrects your emotion.
But other times, your gut is picking up on a subconscious pattern, a thematic truth, that your intellect hasn't yet found the vocabulary to process.
Your emotions are acting like a highly sensitive radar system, pinging a truth in the dark before the slow, methodical spotlight of your intellect can catch up to it.
As the source says, your emotions can literally beat your intellect to the punch.
Think of it like navigating a ship through a storm. You have the compass and the charts, your logic and intellect. But you also have the physical feeling of the wind changing direction against your face, the sound of the hull groaning, your emotions and intuition.
If you ignore the compass, you'll sail onto the rocks. But if you ignore the changing wind because it's not written on the chart yet, the mast will snap.
The intellect and the emotions are caught in a hermeneutical circle. They must mutually inform and correct each other.
When they are in conflict, you don't blindly choose a master. You sit in the tension. You evaluate your feelings and you interrogate your logic, recognizing both as God-given tools designed to help you perceive objective truth.
We started this exploration by talking about the spreadsheet. That desperate human desire for a binary, perfectly categorized, logically flawless, diagnostic readout of reality.
We mapped the strict architecture of logic, distinguishing valid structures from true materials.
We navigated the traps of informal fallacies, and we recognized that logic is a buzzsaw that relies on an intelligible universe, yet fractures against the infinite.
Which forced us to tear down the wall, separating us from the heart. We threw out the icebox theology.
We saw that emotions are commanded, that the Creator is a deeply passionate being, and that the charioteer of pure reason is a myth.
We are not just calculating algorithms, and we are not mere vessels of random feeling. Ultimate truth requires the integration of the whole person.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to carry into your day. Society still obsessively categorizes everything into objective hard facts and subjective irrational feelings.
But if Dr. Bahnsen is right, and this hermeneutical circle of the soul is how you are actually designed to function.
If your emotions can act as a valid radar system to perceive truths that your intellect has missed, what entirely accurate, beautiful parts of reality are you currently blinding yourself to, simply because you've convinced yourself that only your spreadsheet mind is allowed to dictate the truth?
What is your radar pinging right now that your logic is refusing to look at?
A profound question to carry forward. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive. It's been a massive, dense, and I hope entirely paradigm-shifting journey. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and don't be afraid to let both your mind and your heart do the heavy lifting. We'll catch you on the next one.